Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest, reacting to the Toronto Raptors 107-95 loss to the Houston Rockets. Ryker had that tough game against the Pistons the weekend, and now the Houston Rockets coming to town, obviously a much better team, but unfortunately, it was a very up and down game. There's some stretches, there's a lot of takeaways from this one, but the Raptors couldn't pull it out in the end.
Yeah, I'm disappointed that the Raptors are on a little bit of a slump now, but this is a good team. Mm-hmm. This is a Houston Rockets team that one thing that I've taken away from spectating them, because I don't get to watch the Houston Rockets that much, is that this is a team I think is legit in the Western Conference. I think that they actually have a chance if they see a matchup versus the Golden State Warriors to really maybe even take them an entire series. So for the Raptors to lose this game, I think is not horrible. Mm-hmm. Especially with the way the starters played against them, and we'll get into that. But I think that some things were very discouraging in this game for the Toronto Raptors front, so we'll also break that down. So we can start wherever you want.
Yeah, certainly, there's a lot of highs in this game, a lot of lows, and the Houston Rockets are a team, you mentioned it, they're legit. James Harden came out, continues his 30-point per game streak there. The Raptors played phenomenal defense on him until about the end of the fourth, where clutch time happened and James Harden really stepped up. But you mentioned it, the starters for the Toronto Raptors were absolutely amazing tonight. And we'll start with the positives, because Raptors Digest, we like to keep it positive on here. And the start of the game was fine, then the bench came in, and we ended up being down by 18 going into the half, and then the third quarter stretch, that stretch of game where the starters were in there and just went absolutely wild. The defense was some of the best we've seen all season, and to watch that as a Toronto Raptors fan, regardless of, the negatives that we'll get into, if I had to take something away from this game, it was how excited I was about the starting unit playing together. It looked like they had all complete chemistry. The trapping, Nick Nurse ran some great defensive sets. Now, he made some poor decisions with rotations, but we got to give him credit for the defensive sets he had on trapping James Harden. James Harden was 12 for 30 for this game. He missed a lot of shots, and especially before the fourth quarter, the Raptors had him on lock. And Kawhi Leonard, Pascal Siakam, Danny Green, Kyle Lowry, everyone was playing ridiculous defense. Kyle Lowry was diving on the floor, getting standing ovations. Just what were your thoughts on that just huge run?
Well, this is what I think, is that you're exactly right, that the rotations on James Harden worked really well, because usually James Harden can exploit a matchup, and that's what you'll see. The one thing I didn't think the Raptors were able to adjust to very well throughout the entire game was the pick and roll with Clint Capella and Chris Paul, but I thought that they were able to actually do quite a good job on James Harden in switching all screens, because Pascal Siakam, even at his length and size, is able to guard laterally James Harden quite well.
Yep.
And this brings up a point that we had in our debate whether or not Serge Ibaka or Marc Gasol should be the starter, consistently for the Toronto Raptors. And we said a point that we agreed on was that really it depends on the 5 matchup.
Yep.
And whether it's same thing as the JV and Serge situation, where if there's a more traditional big man, then you put out the more traditional big man. If they're playing a smaller size lineup, then you would probably want Serge Ibaka in the starting lineup. And this is a guy, Serge Ibaka, that you really felt was the defensive anchor in tonight's game.
Yep.
And a lot of the run and the momentum paired with everybody putting their heart and their bodies out on the line on defense, was really able to go on the run in the third quarter.
Certainly, Pascal Siakam had a great game, but in my opinion, the MVP for the Raptors was Serge Ibaka, especially, you mentioned the defensive anchor, 10 points, 15 rebounds for Serge Ibaka and 5 blocks, and, he struggled coming off the bench for the Raptors, and Marc Gasol is a 3-time All-Star. He's a guy that's supposed to come in, hit shots. His jump shooting has looked a bit skeptical as of late. I mentioned on the last pod, his jumper, if he's not hitting jump shots, it's a bit of a worry for a Raptors fan. That's one of the big reasons we brought him in here. Obviously, he's a solid defender for, a big lumbering guy. But Serge Ibaka, you mentioned it, is mobile. He can get, he stayed with Clint Capella, especially in the paint. And, 5 blocks for Serge, only, 4 fouls, which there's some weird calls at the end. But I was just super encouraged to see him, how he was switching, how he was adjusting, and getting a lot of rebounds. That was one of the worries when we initially had Serge Ibaka starting at the center position. And it was a bit of an issue at the beginning of the season, was the rebounding and the defensive rebounding for the Raptors. But he's done a solid job as the season has went along at getting the rebounds. And tonight against, Clint Capella was a phenomenal rebounder. Serge Ibaka did a great job of cleaning the defensive glass.
Yeah, and now Kawhi Leonard, as always, when he plays well. He's a guy that really is fantastic. And watching him, I'm thinking, wow, this is a guy, first quarter especially, I was thinking he's really the only guy that's creating any shots here efficiently or getting into the lane. And then Pascal Siakam, who's been over the past, I think since the All-Star break, has been averaging 21, 24 points a game, something like that. Had a really slow start in the first half. I believe he only had 2 around that points. Finished the game with 17. What'd you think, before we get into any of the negatives, what'd you think of the guys like Pascal Siakam and maybe even Danny Green is worthwhile talking about? And then we'll swing into, of course, the bench woes.
Yeah, certainly Pascal Siakam did a phenomenal job in the second half. Was a big reason, the Toronto Raptors really couldn't hit a shot in the first half. Kawhi Leonard was the only guy really generating offense, and obviously when one guy is the only guy that's making shots, obviously you're going to be down big. But Siakam was a big reason of that, third quarter, just complete monster run, just because of his energy and the way he sprints the floor, and Lowry just feeding those passes ahead. Lowry played a phenomenal game with the starters. With the bench, that's another story. And Danny Green, he went 4 for 13 from the three-point line tonight, but that's kind of skewed, that poor percentage, just because at the end of the game, he took about 5 threes in the fourth, with like 2 minutes to go that were all contested. So I think his three-point percentage might be a little bit skewed because of those final shots, but he had 14 points, 5 rebounds. He had a very solid game himself. And you can look at the plus minus. Obviously, that isn't all telling, but for the starters, it was Danny Green plus 19, Serge Ibaka plus 18, Kawhi plus 10, Siakam plus 11. Lowry is a minus 5, and we'll get into why after. So the starters were really good, but the Raptors lost this game. There's we're 7 minutes in. There was a lot of negatives to take away from this game as well, and there's a few discouraging things. And the first thing that I want to get into is Marc Gasol looked, obviously this isn't the perfect matchup for Gasol, a more mobile, a sprinting big man, but when Serge Ibaka was taken out and Gasol was taken in, the defense kind of slowed down. The hedges, the reason the defense was so effective, especially in that third quarter, is because they were trapping James Harden. They did a solid job even at Chris Paul during that stretch and trapping him up front. But then Gasol kind of did he's not a bad pick and roll defender, but the energy wasn't there. What were your thoughts on just Marc Gasol, how he changed the game versus Ibaka?
No, it's absolutely right. And Marc Gasol is touted for his offensive ability and his ability to create and his passing ability. And people say, don't understate him or don't look over him as a competent defender.
Well, he was a defensive player
in a game like this. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, when you're playing a Houston Rockets team that's exclusively three-point shooting and one pick-and-roll guy, and their biggest player that they're going to have out on the court is Clint Capella, right? And you're subbing in Marc Gasol when the matchup is going to be against Nene. Of course you're going to be exposed, right? Because the entire premise and the entire defensive scheme this night was switch all screens. Mm-hmm. Right, and that's not going to work if you have James Harden out there and you have all these pick-and-roll guys and all. It's Houston Rockets offense, right? Is to run as many screens as possible. So but it only naturally makes sense to me that Marc Gasol is going to be a bit of a liability out there tonight, and that's sort of what happened.
But one of the things that confused me, because even in the games that he's played, obviously in the history of Memphis, he's been a phenomenal defender. But even the rest of the games with the Raptors, Gasol's always been pretty solid in the pick and roll defense. He's pretty good at hedging screens. But tonight he just he pulled a JV sort of defensive screening mentality and sagged back in the paint. And I don't think that was the strategy for the Toronto Raptors. Maybe they told Gasol to do something different, but Gasol's usually pretty good, so I was a bit confused with how he played on the defensive end. I want to see him with more energy. Obviously, he wasn't horrible, but I hold him to a higher standard than the rest of the bench players.
Well, you don't want to understate what team defense means, right? Because it's good to say that, yes, as an individual player, you should know in a matchup that you're going to want to hedge a screen, right? Or you're going to not want to sag back because you're going to see these guys just do a pick and pop, or they're just going to pull up right off not even use the screen, But in a team like Houston, they're not looking usually to score off the primary pick and roll. They're gonna swing the ball around, right? The first pick and roll is to really engage an entire offense, and that's when all of the switches come into play. So it is team defense, and you need to understand what your teammates are gonna do, how they're going to respond to if you switch or if you come up and hedge. Are they going to take your man that rolls off, right? If it's just maybe a pick and flare or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't even think it's incomprehensible to think that maybe Marc Gasol doesn't have the trust yet to step off of his man enough, right, to do a hedge like that. So we'll see a lot of these things become sifted out as the season progresses. But before we get too long, if there's any last points that you want to bring up before we get into
Well, there's a few
Segments?
other players that we'll talk about in a segment,
Just do quick.
a final segment we'll talk about. So we'll just swing it straight into the segments. And tonight, the
Okay.
Kawhi you do him like that play of the day. I don't know if you have one in mind, but certainly for me, it's got to go to Kyle Lowry. And there's so many during that stretch, that third quarter stretch, I was absolutely hyped, and it's probably why this game is taken a lot less negative than it could be. But Kyle Lowry, the whole team was hustling. Everyone was playing well. Kyle Lowry's a bulldog, and it wasn't even a play that got the Raptors the ball. But Kyle Lowry, it was at the peak of the run. The ball was going out of bounds. It was flying out, and Kyle Lowry throws his body, sacrifices everything, and doesn't save it, but the crowd got hyped. There was a standing ovation for Kyle Lowry, and it's a weird Kawhi doing like that play of the day, but it hyped me up as a Raptors fan.
No, it's fair. It's valid, man. And it was an amazing third quarter run or third quarter stretch. So it's too bad that they weren't able to capitalize. But as I said, I'm not too disappointed with this game because a lot of the issues can be ironed out as the season progresses. There's still 20-something games left, or around 20 games left, and the Houston Rockets are a good team.
Yep.
So bring it to the OGs.
Yeah, and your top guys are the only players that you worry about in the playoffs, and we're chilling with our top guys. But not all plays can be the Kawhi doom like that play of the day, and some just make you say, oh, geez. And tonight, the oh, geez play of the day, for me, it's gotta go to James Harden. This guy, he struggled. The Raptors did a pretty good job on shutting him down. Even Chris Paul, they shut two of those guys down pretty well for the whole night. But in the fourth quarter, James Harden just hit these two ridiculous step backs. Obviously, the step back has been, infamously known as his shot this season, but there's one that seemed like it was 5-6 feet behind the 3-point line, another one straight over OG. Great defense on him both times, but those were daggers when he was playing against the Raptors bench in the fourth quarter.
Yep, the old adage, good D, better offense, right?
Yeah.
He's an MVP. He is an MVP player.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no two ways around it.
Yeah. He hits those big shots, and I'm a big fan of James Harden. I'm happy he's not in our conference, so I can kind of root for him when he's not playing us. So I'm happy if we lost. I'm happy he kept his 30-point game streak going. That was the one thing that I was kind of side rooting for. But finally,
no, that's over.
Is it?
He doesn't have the 30. Yeah,
that's
ended a couple
that's
games
just
back.
unfortunate. Then there's no positives out of this game. That sucks. But regardless, the infamous Damari Carroll Gold Star Award, and we alluded to it. The rest of the bench was horrible tonight. There's no other way of putting it. And the first guy, he got it last game. It's got to go to is Jeremy Lin. 2 points for him, 1 of 5 from the field, 3 turnovers. Jeremy Lin's such a talented player. We made a whole video breaking down how he could possibly change the team, but he still hasn't hit a 3 for the Toronto Raptors. A career 37% 3-point shooter. I believe he was shooting 35% before he got sent over in the trade. So that's been a very weird situation. He rarely turns over the ball like this. He's usually pretty good at slashing. He's on a consistent basis, he's good for at least 8 to 12 points a game. But for most of his stretch with the Toronto Raptors, it really hasn't been there for him.
No, he's struggling, and it's gonna bring down the overall performance of the team. Yep. That's for sure, because they're going to rely on him as the playmaker off the bench.
Especially with Fred
out. Exactly. This is what we're saying. He needs to be a crucial part of this team that has to step up. So I'm hoping that he can figure it out, because he obviously has a good IQ for the game and his defensive ability. He was the highest net rated defensive player on the Atlanta Hawks, according to himself. I haven't looked into the numbers, but he says it. Mm-hmm. And he's a competent enough player. He just needs to start making shots.
Yeah, and, we already talked about Marc Gasol. He's the guy that we hold to the highest standard off the bench, whether it's him or Ibaka coming off the bench. They're the most talented pieces, obviously. But to list the guys, especially when Jeremy Lin's struggling, OG Anunoby, Norman Powell, Patrick McCaw, Jeremy Lin. When Jeremy Lin's struggling, none of those guys can really create for themselves. It's Norman Powell can kind of slash, but he gets out of control, especially against good defense like the Houston Rockets. And we already mentioned Lin, but those 3 other guys, those 3 other wing players, McCaw, Powell, and Anunoby, they really struggled, and just the offense was horrible when they were out there. They couldn't really create anything, and it just hurt to watch. It hurt to watch the bench go against Houston, because usually the Achilles heel for Houston is their bench. But we saw guys like Gerald Green and Austin Rivers really get the best of this team. It's one question I want to pose to you, and this is why I'm not super frustrated about this game, is because obviously, everyone knows the rotation's going to get cut down in the playoffs, And, obviously off the bench, Gasol, probably Lin just because of his history. But we could make that up for debate, and Fred will be there as well. But out of the guys of OG, Norm, and McCaw, who are you most expected to go forward? Who do you have most trust in going into like a playoff series? It's a tough one.
It's good. It's a good question.
Because they're all good. They're all solid defenders. Then they can all kind of hit threes, and Norm's a bit.
Well, this will be the last point of the pod. We're running long here. For me, I got to jump, but I think that this is the thing. This is how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Is McCaw, you know exactly what you're getting from him.
Yep.
You're not asking for scoring. You're asking for maybe 1 or 2 shots when he's out there, and you're asking for relentless defense.
Mm-hmm.
From OG Anunoby, you know that you're going to get more defense, but his style of play is more passive than Patrick McCaw. Even on offense, when Patrick McCaw takes less shots, you still feel like he's more of a presence. He's still running off-ball cuts or off-ball screens. Like, he's doing a lot more. You sense him out there. And then Norman Powell, while he has potential, he's just so unreliable in terms of his IQ and in terms of shot selection, in terms of the dribble drives that he takes to do sometimes. So I have the least amount of trust in Norman Powell, even though he has the biggest upside. I could see, honestly, surprisingly, maybe Patrick McCaw being relied upon the most of those 3 guys moving into the playoffs.
That's an interesting take. It's hard to argue because, as you mentioned, he's a very good cutter. He does. You know what you're going to get from McCaw. OG, obviously, I think OG has the highest ceiling out of the guys, but this season it's been up and down for him, and Norman Powell, it's been extremely up and down. So let us know what you guys think about those 3 guys. That could be a whole video in itself there as we inch closer to the playoffs. But yeah, the bench really struggled tonight. Hopefully they'll be able to turn it around as we play more games. Ryker, are we tanking for the 2nd seed?
Who cares if we do? It's the playoffs. This is one of those years that finally it's like, we have confidence in the team. Seeding doesn't matter. This is you say for the LeBron James Cleveland Cavaliers team. Did any of those fans ever care what their rank was come playoff time? No, because they knew that they could handle any team in the playoffs, and the same for the Raptors this season.
Certainly. You guys are the best for making it this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. Twitter's been blowing up, so we really appreciate you guys on all those platforms. Raptors are going to turn it around. We're waiting for the playoffs. As Kawhi mentioned, this is just practice for the playoffs, so good things are going to happen. Any last words, Ryker?
Nope, that's it. Cheers.